Alright, you can't talk about Wilson's diplomacy or more diplomacy without talking about Mexico. Because this old boy hated him some Mexico. Alright? And he's going to intervene in Mexico a whole bunch. Porfirio Diaz, is he on your packet?
No.
Diaz?
It doesn't pop.
Okay, we'll add it somewhere. Porfirio Diaz had actually been the dictator of the country for years and years and years. And finally, a guy named Victoriano Huerta, which is fun to say, as I say Huerta. It's way cooler than French. Victoriano Huerta finally got control. There was a gigantic war inside of Mexico for control. You guys have heard of Pancho Villa before? Have you heard of Pancho Villa? Pancho Villa is trying to gain power from the north. And the Zapatas are trying to gain power. Finally, the United States got involved and we took over the city of Veracruz. And when we took over the city of Veracruz, Huerta is eventually going to leave. It's called the Tampico incident. Some American sailors had gotten out and had committed some sort of crime, and we get our ships, we get our people back, and we were apologizing, and we wanted, when you leave an area, you give a 21 gun salute, right? You fire off your cannons sort of as, okay, we're leaving, we respect you, all this stuff. But the problem is, if we would have fired off our guns after this Tampico incident, then what would that mean in terms of our relationship with Huerta? Huerta was a guy we didn't like.
We saluted him, basically.
If we saluted him, we recognized his government, right?
Yeah.
So this guy Huerta had taken over power in Mexico. We did not like him. Wilson didn't recognize Huerta as being the leader. And the Tampico incident and our refusal to salute him was symbolic of the fact that Wilson did not want to abide by the rulers that Mexico were putting in office, or these revolutionaries. You can see pictures of Zapata, you can see pictures of Madero. Porfirio Diaz had been leader forever. Carranza is eventually going to become leader of Mexico. But, and there's Pancho Villa, who ironically later became a Mormon. He's a really odd dude. Not to say that if you're a Mormon, you're odd. I'm just saying that he was Catholic/Mormon.
Wow.
He's an interesting fellow. And eventually, we're going to invade Mexico. John Pershing, who ends up becoming our lead general during World War II, invaded Mexico to try to take out Pancho Villa because he went into New Mexico and killed some Americans. And we were essentially going to keep invading Mexico. In fact, Wilson said, I'm going to teach the Mexican government, I'm going to teach the Mexicans to elect good people. That we should be the conscience of the world. Wilson he believed in a new world order. That we should spread democracy. That we should get rid of colonialism. We should promote peace, so long as it's peace and democracy that America can understand and respect. And because of this, we invaded, trying to get Huerta out after the Tampico incident. We invaded northern Mexico after Pancho Villa. And Mexico is always going to be a thorn in the side of America. In fact, do you guys remember learning about World War I and you learned about the Zimmerman note? That said, that was a note to Mexico saying, if you attack America, then we'll give you back some of your possessions after the war. The reason why Mexico was reached out to is because America had huge problems with Mexico, and we were already dealing with it. We were trying to condemn colonialism, but in the end, and you can see a picture of John Pershing. This is John Pershing with Pancho Villa in 1914 before we actually went after him. And you can see we also have a lot of interest in terms of our investment. Look at this. This is the difference between. So here is Latin American and Caribbean. Look how much more we're investing in having money in Latin America and the Caribbean. Does it make sense that for Hannah, for instance, why we would use dollar diplomacy, because we have more interest. If this was 40 years before this, where would most of our money be going? Probably into Europe, right? In terms of trade, probably more European. But more and more, who are our biggest trading partners now? Does anyone know who our biggest trading partner is?
China.
It's Canada. It's Canada, then China, then Mexico. Because of NAFTA, we trade with Latin America and Canada, Mexico and Canada specifically, a lot. In fact, most of our oil comes from Canada and Mexico now, and from America itself. We are basically off of foreign oil. We're getting really close to not ever needing foreign oil for the next decades.
I hate it whenever someone's just like, yeah, we're still in Afghanistan because of oil.
Well, Afghanistan doesn't have a lot of oil.
No,
That's why. But a pipeline will go through it. But yeah, I mean, people can make the argument that Iraq has something to do with oil, but the first Iraq war, yes. The second Iraq war, it's a little bit harder to make that argument. But yeah, Latin America is increasingly becoming important, which is why we're becoming more imperialistic toward this group. And you can see just how many times, look how many times America has intervened in Latin America. Support of the Panama Revolution in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Obviously in Puerto Rico and Cuba during the Spanish-American War. We've attacked in Veracruz, right, during the Tampico incident. Military intervention in 1914, 1916 through 1919. And later we intervened in Venezuela over the German and British issue over how much money they owed. In the end, and later, didn't we also intervene in terms of forcing arbitration between Venezuela and British Guiana, right? So America is really, really active, and this serves as an example of just how different America had become over the last 20 years. We went from having no real possessions to having a huge sphere of influence for Latin America. What's the difference between a possession and a protectorate? Yeah, a possession means we own it. A protectorate means that we have the option, if we choose to go in and intervene and do whatever we want in our interests. Do what?
So we have the option to own it.
Right. It's you're leasing it with an option to buy. So you can see our intervention there. William Jennings Bryan, by the way, was Secretary of State for Wilson, and then in the end resigns over our imperialist ambitions, specifically in relationship with World War I problems. But Wilson, you also see on your packet stuff like, we talked about the Jones Act already. Who's the Jones Act? That gave us Puerto Rico. It allowed Puerto Rico to have some territorial rights. And then the Jones Act in 1916 promised the Philippines independence in 30 years, which actually we did do. And the ones at the bottom, like Nicaragua and all that, these are actual places that we did intervene. There's even a tab. You're not going to see a question, what's the following places in America not intervene? But I want you guys to know just how many times America sent in its Marines, or its Army, or used gunboat diplomacy with the Navy, so you can get an idea of just how deep our imperialistic ambitions were in Caribbean and Pacific. Right? These are the two areas where we're being imperialistic. The Caribbean and Latin America, and the Pacific area. Specifically, China and the Philippines.
Why did we set like a time limit on the Philippines?
Actually, I don't know that answer. Probably because they had become easier to govern, which is a horrible thing to say. They become easier to govern, and we were trying to give them a path to independence. Also, William Jennings Bryan was Secretary of State, who was an anti-imperialist. In fact, he was one of the founding members of the Anti-Imperialist League, and I think he thought it was better for our country and pushed for the idea of this. And it was also part of Wilsonian moral imperialism, right, or moral diplomacy. Allow yourself to have your own independence, but do it in an organized fashion that would be good for moral perpetuity. That's a good question. Other questions? Okay, now get your essays out again. Let's look at the progressivism issue.